very much for joining us, and welcome to AFFIRM's November virtual speaker series. And I'm Robin Gardner, one of AFFIRM's program co-chairs, and I want to extend our warmest welcome and appreciation to you for joining us today. Today's program, IT Support During Natural Disasters, will be showcasing several very distinguished government leaders. We have Sam Viavatni, and he's the director of the Sandy Recovery Division for New Jersey's Department of Community Affairs. We also have Jeff Flick, who is the deputy director for Service Delivery Division in the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, also known as NOAA. And we have Sharon Cannon, our chief of staff from the United States Department of Agriculture's National Finance Center. And our moderator, Tom Temin, who's the host and managing editor for Federal Drive with Tom Temin. I'd like to take a moment to share some insights about AFFIRM, the Association for Federal Information Resource Management. We are a nonprofit, volunteer, educational organization with the goal of improving the management of information through technology within the federal government, spanning over 40 years. In the spirit of AFFIRM's charter, we have raised and contributed well over $250,000 to date for high school and college scholarships. We'd like to thank our volunteers for their hard work to put programs together and continue to support the IT community. Even during these times, specific thanks go out to today's program leads, Deirdre Murray, Art Shanker, Joseph Knobloch, and Lori Glover. And we extend our sincere thanks to our generous speaker series sponsors, SAIC, TrustWave, Fed Insider, ServiceNow, Veritas, Excel Technologies, and E3 Sentinel, as well as our sustaining partners shown in the slides. Their logos are included in acknowledgement of our appreciation for the support, and I would like to invite now Steve Hoffman from TrustWave to say a few words.
Hi, Robin. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Steve Hoffman. I'm the Vice President at TrustWave Government Solutions, and we're very honored to be one of the sponsors for today's event. For those of you who aren't familiar with TrustWave Government Solutions, we also call ourselves TGS. We're known in the market as the #1 provider of data protection in the U.S. federal market and the federal systems integrators, specifically through products like DB Protect and App Detective Pro. Also, very exciting news at TrustWave. In September, we announced that our TrustWave Fusion platform is now available on AWS Cloud, where we're going to be providing managed threat detection and response capabilities to those same agencies. So our whole team here at TGS is dedicated to supporting the cybersecurity mission of the federal government, the federal FSI community, and our partners. Again, we're honored to be a sponsor of today's event, and we're looking forward to the collaboration. Back to you, Robin.
Thank you, Steve, and TrustWave for your continued support. Year after year, the AFFIRM community contributes in many ways through grants, scholarships, and volunteer dedicated service. Of all the good we do together, our favorite is our annual support for the Marines Toys for Tots. And this year, in light of the impact of the pandemic on many families with small children, give generously to children in need. Please donate now by buying a toy virtually from the Toy Box or by making a cash donation, both on the Toys for Tots website. And I believe we also have a link for that on our website. So please take a look, and we really hope that you find it in your hearts to extend some generosity to Toys for Tots. AFFIRM will continue to hold an array of virtual programs, so please check AFFIRM's website for more details on our upcoming events. And now over to Bill Pratt, one of our program co-chairs, with a few quick housekeeping items.
Thank you, Robin. Hello, everybody. If you have a question, simply open the Q&A tab on your webinar toolbar and type the question. If you see another question you'd like the speaker to answer first, click the thumbs up button to upvote the question. If you're having technical difficulties, please use the chat box in your toolbar to chat with the webinar host. We have included a brief survey at the end to capture your feedback on our event to help us continually improve. We appreciate it if you can take a couple seconds to participate when we wrap up. The survey will pop up in your internet browser when you close the Zoom application. Thanks for being here. Back to you, Robin.
Thanks, Bill. And without further ado, I am pleased to introduce today's moderator, Tom Temin. Tom is a longtime active participant in the AFFIRM events. And please join me in the chat box, giving Tom a warm AFFIRM welcome.
Thank you very much, Robin. It's good to be back with AFFIRM, one of the great groups that brings really good programming for, gosh, decades here to the federal IT market, the federal program management market. And we've got a really great program today. It's kind of apropos, considering that as we approach Thanksgiving, the whole year seems like one big, long-running natural disaster. And I guess you could say pandemic is a natural disaster that affects every federal agency. And I think the important lesson we've all gotten repeatedly from this particular disaster is that without the IT in place that agencies have been building on, and I've heard story after story of federal agencies having done a lot of modernization groundwork, little knowing how deeply it would pay off when the pandemic hit and everyone was able to work remotely, for the most part, without missing a beat. So that'll be kind of our theme today. But we do have other natural disasters. We've had record fires happening in the country. We've had our share of floods. It's been an active hurricane season. So all the usual natural disasters have been happening also. And probably one state that keeps getting hit one way or the other is New Jersey. And so I'm going to go first with our first opening question, and we're going to go through the line to all of the guests. And please, our panelists, come on now with your pictures, if you will. But I want to go to Sam Viavatni, the director of Sandy Recovery Division, New Jersey Department of Community Affairs. Sam, when I think of Sandy, being a kind of native beach bum myself, I think it must be recovering the sand on the beaches of the Jersey Shore that I love so much after a disaster. But tell us what the Sandy Recovery Division really is and what it does and your role in it.
Great, thank you, Tom. So the Sandy Recovery Division, which I serve as the director of, was established in the early parts of 2013. Sandy hit the shores of New Jersey October 29th, 2012. So we just recently it's not a celebration, marked the anniversary of 8 years since the storm. And the Sandy Recovery Division within the Department of Community Affairs was designated the grantee by the governor's office to receive over $4 billion in federal funds, CDBG-DR monies from HUD, with the specific purpose of helping the state recover in the aftermath of the storm. And you wonder, how are we still here being called the Sandy Recovery Division 8 years later? Well, a lot of that work is still going on today. So in the initial aftermath, a lot of the work that we did was specifically related to, like I said, helping homeowners, helping renters, getting money in their hands to rebuild and help provide funding for those folks to recover. A lot of what's going on today in the division is much more infrastructure related. So we have some beach replenishment projects that, as you noted, we are helping the sand on the shores of New Jersey, supporting some Army Corps projects. We are doing some larger mitigation efforts in Hoboken, which is a very prominent project, over $230 million to essentially develop a wall structure, resist structure to prevent the storm surge in an event like Sandy from really, putting Hoboken underwater for weeks. And so there's a lot more to what we do. By the numbers, we've received $4 billion and we've dispersed over 3.3 billion of that. So we have a significant amount of money left that we still need to expend over the next few years.
And just a quick follow-up question, what kinds of oversight mechanisms and follow-up mechanisms does the state have in place? And I'm making a parallel to the types of audit mechanisms that the government at the federal level often establishes in the aftermath of these big one-time expenditures. We're just getting into it with the PPP and so on. But does New Jersey, kind of somebody else outside of the agency, make sure that you're staying on the straight and narrow here?
Sure. So we've been subjected to numerous audits. One of the things that was required in the 113-2 appropriation, which Congress passed and President Obama signed in 2013, was the first time that there was a requirement for an internal audit position to oversee within the department the grant funds from the federal government. So we already at the Department of Community Affairs had that function in place. So we were ready to hit the ground running, and that function is helped in a variety of ways. One being the main point of contact for like I said, the variety of audits and numerous audits that we've been subjected to. Most prominently, probably the HUD Inspector General. I think it's about a half a dozen audits that we've been subjected to. Now we've done our legwork in developing systems and processes and using our own internal audit to prepare ourselves for those audits. So we've done not too bad as far as findings and monetary penalties that we've received as a result of the federal audits. We also have our state comptroller that has done auditing of the Sandy Recovery Division, and also has acted as a partner with us to serve as a member on the Sandy Fraud Task Force, which we helped develop in conjunction with the governor's office.
Yeah, so there's really an interesting big story there. One is the interrelationship of federal and state, and then there's also the need for data exchange, data compatibility at the kind of granular level, and then program compatibility and simpatico thinking at the program and mission level. So I think there's some good lessons learned there. And I want to go to Sharon Cannon, Chief of Staff of the USDA's National Finance Center, which in years that we can all remember has had its own disaster. And so Sharon, tell us what you're doing these days down there with respect to disaster planning, because a disaster there is a disaster for everyone who wants to get paid in the federal government. Plus, you've got your own large workforce in place there also, and now everyone's teleworking. We'll get into that too. So unmute yourself and tell us what's new.
Certainly. So welcome, everyone. Glad to be with you. You're right. Hurricane Katrina has been 15 years now, but we were able to get through that event through some hard work and a lot of focused attention. After Katrina in 2017, our office building was destroyed by an EF3 tornado, which skipped through New Orleans. So now we're in the phase of the pandemic, and we're able to use some of those lessons learned from Katrina and tornado in the pandemic, in that our workforce is mobile. We're able to support their work on a daily basis through their connections, their network connections, in a seamless way, so that our customers continue to receive the services that they expect.
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe, God doesn't like the National Finance Center's physical
Don't say
location
that.
to keep throwing lightning bolts at you. But what is the level of telework now, and what are the kinds of systems developed in the interim since that disaster that'll enable you to work effectively teleworking?
Sure. So those events have helped us to evolve really over the years. At Katrina, there was very limited telework among the staff. Now with the pandemic, everyone is teleworking, with the exception of about 30 employees who are rotating in and out of the office facility here in New Orleans. But that's evolved over time. One of the things that we did in preparation, or as a part of our lessons learned over the years, all of our workforce members now have laptop computers as opposed to desktop computers. That's a major difference. And with those laptop computers, we configure them in a way so that everyone has the remote access, all of the applications, procedures, and techniques that they need in order to support their work, regardless of where they are. So that's been very helpful to us.
And I imagine the people that you serve, the agencies that use the services from the Finance Center, also being remote capability, can check on everything from their personal payroll and deductions and so forth to maybe some, whatever other services that you might provide the agency at the managerial level. They can also interact with you remotely.
Absolutely. So our data center within USDA is located in Kansas City. And on a day-to-day basis, we maintain our network connections with those organizations throughout the country that we service. So in the event of a disaster, while we may be moving or shifting to other locations, our customers are pretty stable, when it's a localized disaster in that way. So the advanced planning that goes into establishing those connections, maintaining them, configuring them, and providing the routine maintenance certainly helps us in a disaster. So while we may shift to another location, our customers don't see that shift happening. They continue to do what they normally do.
Got it. All right. And Jeff, good to have you on our panel. Jeff Flick is the Deputy Director for Service Delivery at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, NOAA. And having watched NOAA so many years, I'm always learning something new about the extent of NOAA activities, NOAA assets, and so on. So give us the disaster recovery big picture, and then we'll get into some of the technologies.
Sure. Thanks, Tom. one of the interesting things about NOAA is that we help predict the disasters, and tracking them as they make landfall or wherever they, regionally, wherever they're at. But because of our wide breadth of geographic, offices and sensors and instrumentation around the country, we're constantly losing access to certain offices or sensors, depending on the degree of the event. So we have established over many years of practice at this resiliency, not only at the communications level, at the personnel level, the application level, throughout the entire portfolio of services that we provide to the public for safe, weather warnings and such. So we've got telecommunications. That's my specialty. And we've got very resilient infrastructure. From an application and personnel perspective, all the weather forecast offices back each other up. And there's a very specific pattern for how we accomplish that. So, the last thing that we want to do is to leave the public without timely warnings.
And I guess you've made a pretty big bet on cloud computing also, Noah.
We definitely have a substantial investment in the cloud computing world, but we still provide the majority of our computing assets are still within commercial and dedicated data centers.
Got it. All right. And Sam, we didn't really get into the IT type of industrial support, IT industry and whatever other industry supports might come to your agency in New Jersey. But, here at the federal level, there is the inherent understanding that IT is the big enabler for mission delivery. And so mission people try to understand IT people at the highest level try to understand the mission. And that's been an evolving pathway for the 30 years I've been watching all of this. Tell us how it works in New Jersey with respect to the IT and industry support that you get for this particular recovery mission, which is now in its, umpty year.
Sure. In 2013, right after the storm, and it was clear that there was an award, a substantial award coming from the feds that needed to be, rapidly to the public and tracked in
Just
a
say
way
that last
to
sentence one more
prevent.
time. We just had a little bit of an internet break, so just
Sure.
repeat that thought if you would.
Sure. So I'll just restart the thought. I apologize if you heard some of it already, but generally back in 13, knowing that the federal appropriation was coming, the state started to look at options for how we could rapidly disperse these funds out to homeowners in businesses and dedicating them to communities in a way that could be tracked. And there was really no system in place that would be flexible enough to do this, at least within the Department of Community Affairs. So we contracted with CGI actually and developed the what we call SIROMS. It's our Storm Integrated Recovery Operations and Management System. And SIROMS is a platform that we use for the tracking, grant management, financial management, reporting. Almost every facet of our recovery is intertwined within the system of SIROMS. And it's a tool that we also use, as I mentioned, we've been subjected to numerous audits, but moreover, HUD is looking, over our shoulder every step of the way. So SIROMS is the system of record for us. I think what we hoped what we could do, and I think we successfully did, was create a system that was able to not only track and manage the funds for us, but also to be able to tell a story to somebody that was looking to whether to monitor, whether it's to audit, or just trying to understand how did New Jersey do what they did in the recovery. And I think SIROMS does that in a variety of different ways.
So there must be multiple ways of looking at it depending on what your function is with respect to the whole disaster recovery. That is to say, the people on the front line see one thing, management, finance sees another thing, all interacting with some kind of a common platform.
That's exactly right. I mean, and I'll note this for the group. I'm not an IT guy, but what we did was, use a series of different modules that are all integrated. And I'll use a good example where we're using SIROMs to integrate into existing platforms that the state had that really couldn't flex to our needs. So New Jersey has a system that we call NJCFS, and it's the financial management system for, we have a $40 billion state budget, and all the money in the state government flows through NJCFS. So SIROMs did something that helped us to coordinate with not only the Treasury of New Jersey, but also to interact directly with partners at other sister agencies across the state, because Community Affairs is only one agency, and we have partners throughout the state that we handed money off to that we needed to still track, act as a grant manager. And SIROMs created that interface directly with NJCFS. And I can't go into the technicalities of it, but these other agencies across state government could work through those two systems seamlessly, being able to report back to DCA, the Sandy Recovery Division, so we could see on a daily basis live what's happening with our funding and programmatically with our metrics.
Yeah, so that sounds like a good case history of making legacy systems interact in a way that is needed in a new way, with kind of combining in the data there with a different system. And Sharon, you were nodding in agreement that sounds like something pretty desirable to do. Tell us the
Yes.
technological recent history at National Finance, which also has a lot of interagency and intersystem interaction.
Absolutely. We have systems on many platforms. The main system, the payroll personnel system, of course, is a mainframe system. It's very robust, but it's integrated with many other systems on different tiers that allow for that integration to be used, even in disasters, regardless of where persons are. So we're able to sustain our operation in that way and deliver on our promised timeframe. So it's very helpful to have that kind of advanced planning and integration in place on a daily basis, so that when disaster strikes, you're able to continue the operation.
And just out of curiosity, your title is Chief of Staff, and give us a sense of what you do daily. What is it? What are your main concerns that come across your
Sure.
desk day to day?
Well, as the chief of staff, I do lots of troubleshooting, but I do have a background in continuity of operations. I worked in that area prior to becoming the chief of staff. So on a daily basis, there are issues throughout the center that require some focused attention, and maybe someone who can cross organizational lines in order to find resolutions or bring folks together to craft those resolutions. So I tend to deal with those issues.
And what have your big lessons learned, personally, and this is not primarily a COVID discussion, but this context is so overwhelming of everyone teleworking, and relative to the experiences in the tornado and the Katrina earlier than that, what are the lessons you've seen that agencies can take away from the technological application of people not being able to get to work?
Certainly. So we invested lots of time and resources in preparing our employees to be resilient and to be able to work in a situation which is not maybe their normal work place or in their work environment. So that really benefited us with the pandemic, because they were very accustomed and comfortable with working from home, working remotely, being able to use those tools and know the resources that they need in order to work effectively from home. So you sort of think of their homes as these mini coop sites and ensure that the infrastructure is there and available to them so that they're able to continue what they need to do in order to deliver the mission. So that's been very helpful for us. The preparation that we do each year, we hold a training session for employees. Throughout the year, there's patching on their workstations and that sort of thing with security. But all of that is very beneficial to us should we have to pivot very quickly and move to a different environment.
Sure. What you say reminds me of one CIO I heard say recently that instead of having 2 or 3 continuity of operations, sites with everyone teleworking, he's now got 10,000.
There's one in every home.
Operation sites. Every place is an agency location now. And
Yes.
Jeff, something you said, Jeff, a few minutes ago with respect to sensors. And NOAA, in many ways, is a sensor-driven organization. It has satellites, I like to say, everything from the bottom of the ocean to space. Assets that you operate, those are all sensors. Plus, there are independent Internet of Things type sensors all over that you do monitor. How does that all figure in from the Internet of Things standpoint in disaster recovery?
You know, one of the challenges with IoT type infrastructures is availability. You know, a lot of that concept relies on high numbers to average out, and if you lose 2 or 3 sensors, you know, it doesn't really impact your overall data. A lot of NOAA's instruments aren't distributed in that level of density. So we still require a lot of high availability for sensors and communications with them. So, you know, we're moving towards that IoT concept, but we still rely heavily on the wireline and communications infrastructure to maintain access to those. You know, when we see local and regional disasters, all of that infrastructure has to be rebuilt. You know, a lot of times sensors have to be replaced. So that's just part of what we do. Every time there's an event, you know, there's something that's going down, you know, across the infrastructure.
And what would you say are 1 or 2 big lessons learned that you have had as a technologist in this dispersal of the workforce, and also at a time of great technological change, regardless of that need for telework? And by the way, I have to say, it looks like you're sitting in a gift shop in a national park or something. That's a really interesting background. I'm trying to discern what some of those little items are, but don't tell us that now.
That's the office in my house, you know, so it's a little bit of family, and then, you know, the nice mural there on the wall. The lessons learned, you know, NOAA was, with like a lot of agencies, we were fairly well situated for the push to telework. You know, we had a pretty aggressive stance on allowing our employees to telework. But one of the big challenges there, and I would say that, you know, we continue to do our mission without missing anything, you know, whether we have to come into the office to do certain functions or we're able to do it remotely. The challenge as this continues on is that we have a lot of scientific experiments, you know, that require laboratories and things of that nature. And so we continue to have our scientists come in and do that work. And we're able, fortunately, to do it in a safe manner. But that still is we're not capable of going 100% telework.
Sure.
We try hard, but, you know, some of those missions got to continue on, and those are, you know, in some cases are in person.
Yeah, I would say maybe the big lessons learned now for everyone is the hybridized nature, if you will, of the way we're all working. And I want to pivot now to the discussion section of industry support for all of this, because industry has its own cross to bear here with respect to its teleworking and disasters and so forth. And Sam, why don't we go back to you? What types of industry support for your program and in general enabling mission accomplishment in New Jersey are you seeking, and how has that changed in the recent year?
So, you know, as I noted, you know, we developed sirens in the aftermath of the storm, and that system for us is, and platform is readily available in anywhere. So our employees within the Sandy Recovery Division of DCA, we're all working remotely at this point. Could have been done, you know, years ago. We were ready to go at any point. And, you know, you don't see that at the rest of the department necessarily. So, you know, the folks that are working off of the system I mentioned, the platform for finance of NJCFS, I mean, those folks have to be in the office. And so, you know, the state is doing everything they can to, you know, limit the in-person workforce, but there's system restraints. And I think the Sandy Recovery Division in particular, you know, we're well positioned to, you know, continue working remotely for the duration. Everything is there in place, and we're continuing to develop with our partners, you know, different strategies to, you know, move beyond Sandy. So I guess one of the points that I'm trying to make is, you know, we're in a bit of a period where we're wrapping up some of the work with Sandy. But we want to develop a way to sustain the knowledge base that we've developed over the past 8 years and be prepared for future disasters. So some of the strategies that we're using are identifying other funding sources. We've been awarded our first non-Sandy funds from FEMA last year. And so we're developing, using the flexibility of SIROM's platforms to move forward in a different direction while maintaining the flexibility should there be another disaster to prop things back up with SIROMs.
And by the way, is SIROMs accessible remotely?
Absolutely.
People can.
Absolutely. All of our staff directly within the division is working remotely through the system. We have auditors working remotely. We're under 2 audits right now, one with the state auditor and one with the federal HUD OIG. And both of them have access to SIROMs to continue their auditing while we're in this remote environment.
All right. So this whole phenomenon is kind of feeding on itself. Disasters make us better, I guess, in some way, in the ability to deliver on the mission. And Sharon, of course, the ultimate goal of the National Finance Center is never to have anyone miss a paycheck. And what kind of industry support do you seek? I mean, you have a mainframe operation with mostly federal employees operating it. What are the types of industry supports you need to be able to do that? And I don't think you've ever have actually missed a beat.
Well, fortunately, knock on wood, but some of our challenges are really administrative or policy-driven sort of issues. When you think about an issue like licensing, we're very fortunate to have a government-managed recovery facility that's a warm site. But when you think about the licensing that's involved in the applications we use, sometimes we need to shift and use those licenses in a different place in our normal work environment. So we have to work with the vendors in order to be able to do that quickly and without, hopefully, lots of expense, involved. So it's more administrative than technical, but it is a challenge for us on occasion.
Sure. And Jeff, with the, I'm going to focus here on the cloud as a class of vendor that is supporting NOAA to an increasing degree. It's conceivable that a cloud would also be hit with a disaster, because ultimately a cloud is actually a building on the ground until we have satellite types of cloud deployments. That's coming, but it's not really here yet. So in the meantime, the clouds are buildings without names on them, and they too can be subject to earthquakes, hurricanes, and tornadoes. So what kinds of agreements do you expect, and what kind of service levels do you expect from industry to make sure that they can support NOAA as NOAA supports itself in a time of disaster?
Sure. So most of the data centers and the cloud providers, they provide very highly resilient facilities. But we have a long history of living through disasters here at NOAA, and we always make sure that for high availability services, products that have to be delivered to the public on a prescribed time frame, we're managing that out of multiple data centers. So if we lose an East Coast or a West Coast data center, we're still capable of providing that service to the public, regardless of that particular event.
Sure. All right. Let me ask this. Looking ahead, and I'll stick with you, Jeff. What are you looking at as technological futures to keep supporting NOAA's disaster missions?
Well, I think that, staying on the cloud bandwagon here, I think cloud will be a huge player as NOAA continues to evolve and take advantage of that capability. As more and more data becomes available and gets pushed out to the communities that use our data, I think cloud is one of those big answers, and it's an area that we have yet to fully explore.
Yeah. So how do you just give us more about how you go about looking at it and kind of evaluating as you look to the next round of contracts or the next round of storage needs or whatever?
One of the big challenges is, as a steward of the data, we have to make sure that we preserve that in a manner that is maintains integrity, but also doesn't cost us an incredible amount of taxpayers' dollars to maintain, right? And in a lot of cases, and we're still looking for that balance within the agency as to where is the storing it on a federal facility versus a cloud facility.
Sure.
Because contracts change and it's very expensive to move a lot of that type of information from vendor A to vendor B.
And Sharon, you're a mainframe based, once again, type of operation, and it's government owned, government operated for the most part facility. Where are the technological futures ahead for the National Finance Center, and how are you deciding how to get there? Is this something that's actively planned? Because it could still
Sure,
be a
cloud is
mainframe.
cloud is certainly part of the conversation for us, but another touch point is security. Now that we have a dispersed workforce in the pandemic, security is really paramount to ensure that all those home networks or touch points where folks are connecting are secure and they're working in a very secure environment. So in addition to cloud, I would say security is important for us.
Okay. And Sam, are you part of that discussion in New Jersey and the futures and where the agency will be?
Yes, certainly. I think, one of the things, I noted earlier was, we're trying to figure out what the Sandy Recovery Division looks like, long term. Are we around, 10 years from now after, Sandy is really wrapped up, the recovery, all the funds are expended, the grants closed out with HUD? What do we actually look like from 10 years from now, if anything? So one of the conversations that we're having internally at DCA is, identifying revenue streams and to keep our work moving forward of mitigating against future storms. But the scalability of our systems is important to manage within that framework. So do we have the funding to maintain a scaled down version of SIROMS that can be ramped up should a storm come, hit the shores of New Jersey? And that's one of the things that, we don't have the answers yet. I think some of the things that we're talking of, the challenges with contracting and figuring out what it looks like, is still an ongoing discussion internally at DCA. And to complicate things, I think states across the country are dealing with loss of revenue. So one of the things, that was on the front burner has been moved to the back. Can we identify a state revenue source to keep the systems going, keep the people in place? And right now, those conversations can't be had because of COVID. So the loss of revenue for the state of New Jersey has made a significant impact on how we're managing these issues today.
Interesting. All right, Jeff, I want to go back to you and get into the idea of the network itself as a big enabler of the mission. I think the last time you were on my show was in July, and we talked about that very topic, and that is the evolution of the network as an enabler. And the network, it sounds simple, but it's a big technological construct. And what does NOAA think about in terms of the futures of its network support?
Well, as we transition from the legacy GSA contracts onto the new Enterprise Infrastructure Solutions contract, the capabilities, the bandwidths available to us, that drives it releases limitations in some ways on what our scientists can do, what our meteorologists can do, how we operate our business. And one of the very interesting things about working in a science organization is, there's a phrase of it, you don't know what you don't know, right? When you have the opportunity to expand your capability, you don't know what you're going to discover. You don't know what you're going to need and how that may fit into enabling the science, right? I've spoken for many years about how my job is to enable the scientists. It's never to say no, right? In all the different roles that I've had, it's how do you say yes? And that's and networking, whether it's through resiliency or additional capability, capacity, new features, it all plays into how we enable that science to happen.
Because I'm thinking of all the agencies that have yet to figure out what they're going to do, say, in the next generation of communications and networking, in the EIS contract generation, which is really at the doorstep, but it's not really entered yet for the most part. And is that part of your thinking also there? Because there's a lot of industry players on that side. Absolutely.
We're looking as the technology evolves, we still haven't figured out how to make the speed of light go faster. So we have limitations there, but those highways, communications highways get wider and we can push more data through them. The advancement of 5G and how that progresses its rollout across the country will be welcomed, because that gives us more bandwidth at a, let's say random locations, right? Instead of fixed locations. I can pick up a cell phone and still get 100 meg capability. You tie that to my laptop or to a device, a sensor or something like that. And, for our teams that deploy for scientific reasons or in support of fires or local disasters, that's instrumental in how they do their job.
And Sharon, let me throw that question to you also, because everything depends on that bandwidth and communications between not just you and Kansas City, but Kansas City and everywhere else. And as Jeff said, we can't make light go faster, but we can make more of it go through a pipe, and we can do it cheaper, which is essentially what networking is all about. So what's the thinking there?
So the network is the essential component, but when you step beyond that, we think of what the devices are that our endpoints are with our users. They're very different now than they were many years ago, and that has some bearing on how we recover from disasters and emergencies. We weren't doing video teleconferencing 15 years ago with Katrina, but now with the collaboration tools we have on the desktop, it happens all day long with all of our employees. So we certainly need more bandwidth and more networking in order to support all the tools that are being used today by all of our employees.
And are you looking at, say, the EIS as a way to get there? Is that in particular? Because I only ask because that question comes up a lot nowadays.
I'm really not certain about that. The IT team could probably speak to that better than I can.
All right. And I do have another question from the audience coming in for you. And by the way, anyone listening in, there is a Q&A box. Just please throw the questions in and I'll be glad to ask. This one is, I guess, from a weather bug, but how many hurricanes has the National Finance Center been through in the last 20 years?
Oh, several.
More
major
New
one
Orleans
was,
and
of
Kansas
course,
City, right?
the major one was Katrina. But this year we've done 3 deployments already in response to storms. And there's some to which we did not deploy, but of course we're monitoring the situation to ensure that it did not disrupt our operation. Fortunately, as active as this hurricane season has been, we have not had major disruptions in our operations.
Okay, well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that because we keep hearing about the numbers of hurricanes, but I don't think they've quite had the whammy, in the end, at least in the United States mainland, as people had feared.
Yes.
Sam, of course, you're probably always watching the weather, but because, New Jersey does have a big piece of shore line. But talk more about the collaboration that you have with the federal government, because I think that state and federal vertical collaboration is something that every agency at the federal level deals with to some extent. What does the federal government look like to you in terms of both not only auditing, but in terms of support? It gives the money, but then it audits on the other hand. And we don't often get a state level official to tell us what the federal government looks like from that standpoint.
Sure. So I think one of the things that's important to understand is you do have the auditing side, and that could be an adversarial relationship that you have with auditors coming in and questioning things that the state may have done. Our relationship with HUD directly is a little bit differently, and we view them more as partners. And they've been quite supportive of our operations. They've acknowledged our successes and continually with our systems. But what they do at the programmatic level is, initially was 3 to 4 times a year. They were in the building at DCA, helping us, looking at programs, giving us technical assistance, and providing, they were monitoring reports that made recommendations and sometimes findings that required certain actions to be taken. And I think the key for us is that it's been a collaborative relationship. There's been folks come in and out of that HUD team that's been our grant manager, but the relationship has remained, like I said, collaborative. And what we do with systems is I talk about the platforms integrating within the state. We also integrate SIROMs to the federal platform, which is DRGR, at least HUD's platform. And so, HUD has just really been, I think, pleased with our ability to report and communicate directly with their systems. And they've even told us, we've entered into partnerships with Puerto Rico, for example, to share our systems. So Puerto Rico, in the aftermath of Maria, we have an MOU with them, and they have the CIROMS platform that they're using to help track their storms. And the same with HUD. There's discussions that have been ongoing with HUD that maybe CIROMS is a system that can be used across jurisdictions when disasters come up. So we're not quite there yet. And New Jersey owns this software at this point, or the software at this point. So we have the ability to share that. We're not trying to make money off of it, but we see the capabilities and the successes we had, and we'd love to be able to share that with jurisdictions across the country.
Interesting. So I guess I want to emphasize the point that all of this collaboration has transcended a couple of administrations, and that despite what we hear in the feuding and the yakking at the political level, at the operational grant audit oversight level, it's pretty much on the issue of the business itself without all of that noise overhead that we hear about so much.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. With one caveat, when you're approaching a transition like we are right now, and that this is the second one that we've gone through since Sandy, you see a little bit of hesitation on decision making at the federal level. But I think that comes with the territory. And so it's short-lived. But regardless, these are the same players that are there for the most part at the federal level that we're dealing with back in 2012 that we are today. So there is quite a bit of continuity.
Interesting. And Jeff, let me ask you about the vertical government cooperation, because many of the states have at least elements of mini NOAAs of their own. And how does that all work? And how do you share information? And what's the technological tie-in?
We work with all the departments of emergency management, around the country. We have teams of designated meteorologists or specialists that will deploy into some of those teams, depending on the situation. And as well as the commercial partners that work with those organizations, and they pull the NOAA data. All the data that we produce is open to the public, so local community to commercial entity. So that we haven't changed that interface any, and those relationships with the local and state partners have been around for generations.
And have you, by the way, found any good software programs such as Sam described in New Jersey that might be deployable nationally that came from one of the state or local partners?
I don't work much in the application space, and a lot of that is pretty specific to the weather related aspects, and it being evolving all the time. So typically one model or one application doesn't live too long. But we share the data. It's our mission is to give it all away.
And here's a question that came in for NOAA, but I think it could could be answerable by all of our panelists. And that is, a big part of working with industry, of developing applications, is the ability to meet. And some agencies have industry days or had them. And so the question is, in your particular situation, how has the pandemic and the separation of people affected your ability to stay current and meet with industry? And Jeff, will let you answer first.
Well, as Sharon mentioned earlier, we didn't have the wide use of video conferencing, 15 years ago, where today it's all we do. I live on the camera, 8 hours a day, it seems like, but I continue to meet with my vendors, and I've always stayed fairly open to that, using their technologies.
Yeah, so it's all virtual. And don't you get screen fatigue?
I do. I do, but I have learned not to touch my face during meetings.
Excellent. Sharon.
Yes, those collaboration tools and video conferencing are very important to us now. It's hard to imagine what life was like before that, but pretty much maintaining those relationships through conference calls and video conferencing and that sort of thing. We've been able to sustain those partnerships.
Saying you can't, I'm thinking of this very AFFIRM meeting, which normally would have taken place after lunch,
In person.
physically in person. At this point, we'd all be reaching for those little desserts they put out, those little hand-sized desserts they put trays out on the table like Clyde's. I will say that I'm within 50 feet of a Clyde's where our studios are in Friendship Heights, but not the same Clyde's that AFFIRM used to meet in. And Sam, what about the interaction with outsiders or insiders? I mean, I guess we know how it's affected because we're all on screens, but what's been the qualitative effect of it, would you say, or the quantitative effect? That is aside from being on a screen.
So I think, internally, between, our state government and even local government partners, it's been seamless, the transition, because the technology was readily available. What's a little bit more difficult because some of our partners are individuals, sometimes elderly, whether it's a business owner or a homeowner, those can be challenges. And we do have the ability to still have in-person meetings when necessary. So with folks that are challenged by the technology, it's problematic. But I think we found a happy medium, and we've been able to I think, continue operations really uninterrupted.
And a final question will go around again, and we'll start with you, Sam. And this is a question that came in for Sharon, but I think it applies to everyone. And that is, besides the fact of not meeting physically in person, I think everyone probably wishes we could meet in person, but not have to drive there. That would be an ideal world, but until they develop teleportation, I don't think that's going to be able to happen. But what about the workflows? Because that's a little bit different from the meeting, and with people separated, there are workflows that in some cases have not been fully automated. There's still plenty of paper forms that move around an agency. So we'll continue with Sam, then we'll get to you, Sharon, on any alteration in just the federal or the governmental workflow, I should say. And
yes, so I certainly don't miss my 75-mile commute down the New Jersey Turnpike. Saving 3 hours a day in the car has been a blessing.
You are indeed a man with great fortitude.
But you're right. I mean, the workflow has been challenging. I say, we haven't missed a beat, but it's been challenging when there's, processes that are not automated. Maybe there's wet signatures that are required. Whatever the case may be, we've tried to develop workarounds, and the federal government has been a partner in this too, and they've waived some requirements for us that have eased some of those burdens. And even within state government, the governor here in New Jersey has issued executive orders to allow state governments to find the workaround to make sure that the business continuity is there throughout the pandemic. So there's certainly some things. It could be mail. I mean, mail has been a major interruption for us at times, especially through the month of October and early parts of this month. I mean, you see, checks going out to businesses or homeowners or contractors taking anywhere from 3 to 4 weeks. I mean, there are issues.
Curious. Okay. Yeah. Those ballots did kind of crowd out a lot of the mail. 10 million voters and 15 million ballots. How'd that happen? Anyway, just kidding. Sharon, workflow?
Yes, we do have some workflows, major workflows that are dependent upon paper. They are driven often by policies that are antiquated and require wet signatures and paper to flow between employees and the National Finance Center through the Human Resources Office, so there are coordination issues. Mail is usually the component that we rely upon to help it move to us eventually. But fortunately, we've been able to achieve some efficiencies as a result of the pandemic. Some of those workflows have been modified so that we can digitize the creation of forms, the completion of forms, and apply digital signatures to them. So if anything, that's a bright spot in the pandemic, that we've been able to move some of those procedures forward, and we hope to capitalize upon it even more so going forward. Printing is also a challenge. Often the output from some of these systems comes out on paper. It's printed and distributed in various ways, sometimes within the organization and in some instances outside of the organization. So we did embark upon a project to digitize some of that workflow so that it can be distributed in PDFs and other formats to persons for their use or signature and return, that sort of thing. It's been very helpful.
So some of those reforms and changes will never go away.
We hope.
Why would you recomplicate a workflow just because people are back in
Right.
the office? Sure.
Why return to paper? We'll just maintain it digitally.
All right. So yeah, that's been a great, I guess, forcing function is the word they use. And
Yes.
Jeff, will go to you as the final comment here on workflows and changes there too.
You know, from a weather execution and management, you know, I don't think we've changed much of our workflows there. You know, we have dependencies on certain systems that are typically only available within the, you know, the physical facilities. But, you know, again, we've been able to maintain a safe workspace for our scientists and meteorologists. You know, beyond that, it's really about IT support, right? What happens when, you know, those laptops start breaking that are deployed, right? You know, a lot of times that requires physical exchange or touching of equipment. And, you know, we've been working with our vendors to simplify that process, you know, so we can ship directly from the vendors with our image and ready for the user to log on. So whether that's a mobile device or a laptop.
All right. Well, we want to keep this meeting on time so everyone can go out and get that, you know, crispy chicken sandwich from the takeout nearby and bring it home to lunch and pretend you were with us for lunch at AFFIRM. So I want to thank Sam Viavatni, Jeff Flick, and Sharon Cannon for being speakers. Thank you to AFFIRM for having me moderate. I'm going to turn it back over to Robin Gardner. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
I just want to say that we could not have had Sharon and Sam on this call if we were all in one room, because one of them is from Louisiana and the other one's from New Jersey. So I think that's a benefit to having a Zoom call. So I do want to thank Sam, Jeff, and Sharon, and of course our moderator, Tom. And this was a very interesting discussion on a very timely topic. And we appreciate you taking the time to join us today. We know you are all incredibly busy. And AFFIRM applauds your contributions and leadership throughout these unprecedented times. And I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And we encourage you all to take the time to complete the survey, and hope you'll join us next month on December 16th for our program event on modernized government through the game-changing technology. And on January 13th, 2021, isn't that nice to hear the year 2021? On the 6th, for our 6th annual Change Agents, Trailblazing Women in Government IT, which from the name, this is a regular event we hold every year. We plan to also have our yearly Marine Corps Toys for Tots drive, and we'll be looking to you to help us make the day better for our less fortunate children. So please think of donating. Again, thank you all for joining. Please take the survey, and we look forward to seeing you all next month.